The history of Cleopatra is quite often romanticized in popular culture. A modern rendition of her story can be seen today. She's arguably one of the most popular queens in human history. Ultimately, the expansionist policy of the Romans would go on to take Egypt at the Battle of Actium, leading to the self-inflicted end of life for Cleopatra. According to one source, the expansionist policy of the Romans ultimately sought to do the same to Arabia and Nubia. The problem was that this particular African queen was no Cleopatra. What up, African world? It's Team here, and welcome back to another video of African history, culture, and worldview. By supporting this channel on Patreon, you're helping in the creation of these videos and contributing to this content. The link to Patreon is in the description box below. Also, stay tuned with a word from my sponsors.
Hello, my name is Howard Dorsey. I'm 54 years old. I'm here to talk about my experience with Herbal results. I was getting sick, so I went to the doctor. And they told me that my blood pressure was high, my cholesterol was borderline or high, so I was very sick. You know, sometimes I thought I was dying at some point. And I ordered a bottle of olive leaf extract. This is how the bottle comes in. And within the first probably week and a half, 2 weeks, I checked my blood pressure and it was back down to normal. It was like 120/80. My cholesterol went down to 125. You know, I definitely believe that olive leaf extract from Herbal Results saved my life. And that's real. I mean, I recommend it to everyone in my family, my friends, and we've seen a lot of results in that manner as well.
Purchase now at herbalresults.net.
To begin, it's important to understand that the details regarding the military skirmish between Rome and Nubia vary depending on the sources. As usual, I try my best to use the most sagacious material available. Based on the details, different conclusions and interpretations are possible. Thus, I'll be sharing the information and adding my personal interpretation of the historical events. Let's begin. I find it interesting that I have yet to hear anyone make a comparison between Queen Amanirenas of Kush and Cleopatra of Egypt. These two queens shared a very similar experience, yet had drastically different outcomes. Both Cleopatra and Amanirenas lived around the same period, Amanirenas taking the Meroitic throne just a few years after Cleopatra's death in 30 BC. Moreover, both faced the same threat in the Roman Emperor Augustus, also known as Octavius. Cleopatra was a ruler of the Ptolemaic period of Egypt, a period that was ruled by the Greeks. She's mostly known for her relationship with Julius Caesar, siding with him against Pompey. Their apparent romance led to the birth of a son. After the assassination of Caesar, Cleopatra had a relationship with Mark Antony, also bearing him children. Ultimately, Octavian, later known as Augustus, rose up against Mark Antony and Cleopatra in his pursuit to conquer Egypt. At the Battle of Actium, Augustus defeated Cleopatra and Mark Antony, leading to his and her tragic self-inflicted end. Popular culture undoubtedly remembers the drama and romance between leaders of powerful states in the ancient world. The intersection of Greek, Roman, and Egyptian interactions are hard to resist. And so, Cleopatra's fame eclipsed the visibility of another queen who was arguably just as powerful and politically astute. The difference was that her encounter with Augustus did not lead to her death, nor the annexation of her state. Meroe was a Kushite state located in what is today modern Sudan. After the end of the Kushite Empire, or the 25th dynasty of Egypt, the Kushites moved their capital there. Queen Amanirenas is believed to have been on the throne of Meroe as early as 25 BC, just 5 years after the death of Cleopatra. With their dates of existence contemporaneous, it's incredible how Cleopatra was able to eclipse Amanirenas in popularity, especially considering the stark antithetical outcomes with the same enemy. The ambiguity of Lower Nubia's status was apparent in the contrasting policies of first the Ptolemies and then the Romans. After Rome took Egypt, Cornelius Gallus, the prefect assigned by Augustus, claimed a region in Lower Nubia, as did the Ptolemies. The Romans called it Tria Constantianos. However, while the Romans sought absolute control and apparent vassalage of the region, the Greeks labeled this Lower Nubian region a kind of supporter or friend. Rome therefore set the borders of Egypt as far into Nubia as the Ptolemies did. The reality of the situation is somewhat harder to determine, however, especially since the Latin, Greek, and Egyptian hieroglyphic versions of the stele all use different terminology. While in Latin, the Meroitic king is in the subordinate position of in tutelane to Gallus, under his protection. The Greek version describes his status as that of proxenia, or public friend. The king at the time of Meroe was Pterotikos. Amanirenas ruled alongside him. A critical component of the brief war, if you will, between Meroe and Rome was a policy of Augustus at the time. The Romans were clear about their expansionist policy, according to scholar Laszlo Torik. In using the term in tutelame receptor, the Romans undoubtedly wanted Meroe to be a vassal. The term was, of course, quite unambiguous as to the political reality of a vassal chiefdom and as to further plans concerning Meroe's fate. The establishment of a vassal chiefdom on a territory conquered from Meroe represented a first step towards establishing a client kingdom and later the annexing of the whole kingdom of Meroe. Such a sequence of events was, however, in reality promptly prevented by a Meroitic opposition. Later, a new Roman policy emerged once Augustus realized the difficulty of the situation. Rome attempted to conquer Arabia and turn the region into a vassal as they intended for Meroe. Roman failure to take Arabia, along with Meroitic resistance, encouraged Augustus to reconsider the expansionist policy. The expedition was motivated by wealth of Arabia and the commercial capacity of the Red Sea and may be regarded as one of the last acts of an expansive foreign policy, which was abandoned after the failure of the Arabian campaign and a concurrent expedition to Nubia. Meroitic resistance to the re-establishment of Egyptian supremacy in the Tria Constantianos was strong and determined. The Kushites seem to have had an agreement with the Greeks that established some level of cooperation in Lower Nubia. When the Romans entered the picture, however, Kushite populations now living in Lower Nubia became subject to Roman taxes that the Kushites and Queen Amanirenas obviously opposed. This seems to have been the origin of the encounter. When most of the Roman soldiers left to invade Arabia, Meroe attacked Roman Egypt and ostensibly occupied Philae, Syene, and Elephantine, carrying off prisoners and the head of an Augustus statue. Another prefect of Egypt, Petronius, responded quickly and in 25 BC defeated the Nubians at Dhaka. Petronius reportedly asked the Kushites why they attacked Egypt, and they said it was because of the taxes. King Pterotikos reportedly died at the Battle of Dhaka, leaving Queen Amanirenas to rule. Petronius captured some territory further south at Qasar Ibrim, which seemed to establish Roman control over Lower Nubia. This is where the historical information becomes a bit strange. Strabo claims that the Romans took Napata, the heartland of Kush. Petronius led an apparent campaign to conquer Napata, or perhaps all of Meroe, and this invasion was praised as a victory according to Augustus himself. According to the scholars, however, this could not have happened. In the winter of 25 through 24 BCE, Petronius made a bold attempt at the conquest of the whole Meroitic kingdom. Although Augustus describes it as a victorious campaign in his Res Gestae, this undertaking failed. Scholar N.G. Hoffman is convinced that the heartland of Kush, Napata, was not reached, and it was pure propaganda. Still, according to Hoffman's discussion of the evidence, the sack of Napata was added only for propaganda purposes, but contrary to historical fact, to the reports on the war. In fact, Petronius's army had to return from the Second Cataract region for the same reason that Aelius Gallus's army did from Arabia. So according to Laszlo Turek, the Romans had to retreat from the Second Cataract region, aka the contested area. However, there isn't much discussion as to precisely why. Despite this, the Roman base at Qasr Ibrim was apparently founded to control the Tria Constantianos region. The Romans seemed to have tentative control over Lower Nubia. When Queen Amanirenas showed up with her army at Qasr Ibrim, instead of a military showdown, both parties agreed to sign a treaty. This is why the decipherment of Queen Amanirenas' text would be useful. Unfortunately, we don't know how to read Meroitic. We only know her stela talks about the Romans because the Kushites called Rome Arme, and we can see that clearly in the text. She made sure to document her side, perhaps knowing that the narrative from the Romans would be inimical to a Kushite perspective. I suspect if we were able to read her stelae, some gaps of knowledge would be filled, perhaps some knowledge that the Romans omitted. These gaps are critical to understand in my opinion because it could explain the bizarre treaty between Rome and Meroe, because we know the Roman series of events, summed up as the taking of Lower Nubia, even Napata, and the absolute defeat of the Meroites. One would think the treaty would reflect that, but it doesn't seem to do so. The terms of the resulting treaty as described by Strabo give the reader pause. The mighty Caesar, after the Meroites had achieved all they had asked for, even exempted them from the taxes he had imposed. In addition to these surprisingly generous terms, which sound strangely like capitulation, the border between Rome's Egyptian province and Meroe was set at Hiera Sycaminos, a considerable reduction of territory from the Ptolemaic 30-mile land, Tria Constantianos, to the 12-mile land, or Dode Constantianos. Let's try and follow the thread of thought here. According to the Romans, they took the heartland of the Kushite kingdom, took all of Lower Nubia, and imposed taxes. After they did this, they removed all the taxes and returned most of the land back to Meroe, establishing a border even further north. Now, I'm not saying that the Romans would never do this, but I think there are considerable gaps of knowledge here. All in all, whatever your outlook is, Queen Amanirenas was steadfast. Through her resistance and diplomacy, she got the Roman taxes revoked, which according to Strabo was the principal Kushite grievance and reason for the skirmish to begin with. Despite her initiative seemingly being met, many sources cite this Roman-Nubian interaction as, and I quote, a Roman victory. But I think it's a bit more complicated than that. What were the objectives of the Kushites and the Romans? Well, for the Kushites, they seemed to want to keep the buffer zone tax-free in the Tria Constantianos region. But simultaneously, according to Laszlo Turek, the Kushites wanted to establish their border firmly against Roman Egypt and control Tria Constantianos more firmly. This may have been the failed initiative of King Pteritikos, and after his death, the queen successfully salvaged the principal Kushite objective, the removal of taxes. And so the Kushites received what they wanted in the revoked taxes, but may not have affirmed their borders as they ostensibly desired, according to Laszlo Turek. The Romans imposed an expansionist policy that was clearly retracted once they faced failure in Arabia and encountered obstinate Meroitic resistance. Although they established a buffer zone border further north to impede Nubian incursions, they willingly rescinded territory to the Kushites that the Ptolemies nominally possessed, a curiously different tone from the expansionist agenda just years earlier. Given this information, in my opinion, for the Kushites and the Romans, these were neither absolute victories nor absolute defeats. They were simply trade-offs. For Queen Amanirenas, she, unlike Cleopatra, was able to secure the sovereignty of her state, and I would think that would be the goal for any ruler facing powerful enemies. I imagine she was aware of Cleopatra's battle with Augustus and wrote in triumphant fashion about her interaction with Augustus. Well, I'm all out, guys. If you like these videos and want to help in its continued production, consider supporting the home team on patreon.com. The link is in the description box below. Know thyself. Remember your ancestors. Peace.